astonishing material. This is a truly new idea at a time when we're desperate for new ideas, so don't miss a single word. Plus, before David starts, we have probably the most incredible Linda Moulton Howe interview in years. Linda has been working for nearly 30 years on the RAF Bentwater case, and she has broken it wide open. She's going to be talking about it at the Dreamland Festival, and this is just a foretaste of that amazing report.
This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Next up, Linda Moulton Howe.
One reporter who loves mysteries is radio's leading science journalist, Linda Moulton Howe. She's an Emmy Award-winning TV producer, documentary filmmaker, and the reporter and editor for EarthFiles.com, the Internet's most respected edge science website. Today she has an extraordinary report for us, the first recorded testimony of a sergeant, a man who was in a tower overlooking the RAF Bentwaters weapons storage area when those remarkable events occurred at Bentwaters December the 26th to 28th in 1980. This is the first time this recording has ever been played, and she will be talking afterwards with retired Airman First Class John Burroughs, who was on the scene. Here she is from Albuquerque, Linda Moulton Howe.
Thank you, Whitley. It was 30 years ago for at least 3 consecutive nights between midnight of December 26th and sunup on December 28th, 1980, that unidentified light, beams, and even a craft of unknown origin were described by United States Air Force men and women at the big joint American and British RAF Bentwaters and Woodbridge Air Base. The deputy base commander at the time, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, even thought beams from these unidentified lights had penetrated the nuclear weapons storage area at Bentwaters. That weapons storage area did have nuclear weapons in December 1980, a top secret at the time. Those nuke bunkers were watched around the clock by security from the WSA Alarm Station Watchtower. The Delta Flight Security Chief in the Bentwaters Tower the night of December 27th to 28th was Sergeant Rick Bobo. The tower was 50 feet above the ground to give a clear 360-degree view. Sergeant Bobo's priority was to report any threat to the WSA. That night, he watched a large reddish-blue light in the sky that hovered stationary for nearly 2 hours and also emitted a smaller light that sped rapidly down into Rendlesham Forest. At least twice, Sergeant Bobo phoned Central Security Control, and in each call, he was told the situation was under control because there was an investigation in the forest. Apparently, that was the same night that Colonel Halt investigated lights and beam phenomena in Rendlesham Forest. Today, Rick Bobo is 52 years old and works in the Indiana Department of Transportation, the state in which he was born and raised. When Rick Bobo graduated from high school in 1975, there was a recession, jobs were scarce, and the next year he enlisted in the U.S. Air Force. He was sent to Lackland, Texas for basic training and ended up at RAF Bentwaters in early 1980. Recently, I talked with Rick Bobo by phone about what he saw and heard during his D-Flight security shift in the Bentwaters WSA Tower on what was probably after midnight on December 28, 1980. And to my complete surprise as a reporter, after 30 years of this phenomena, Sergeant Rick Bobo told me no one ever debriefed him and that my recording with him was the first audio recording for radio.
It looked really big, and there was red and blue, and I did see something come down from it and went down into the woods.
Was the big light still up in the air and something went?
Oh, yes, yes.
So it's up in the air, and something went from it down into Rendlesham Forest.
Yes.
Okay, and how long were you able to see that reddish-blue large light?
Oh, goodness. It was there a long time.
Was there something about it that was highly strange in comparison to terrestrial light?
It just sat there. It didn't go anywhere. It just sat in one spot. I think you could have put a crosshair on it and it never would have moved. Never wavered.
Well, Rick, did you ever see any beams of light come down from the bluish-red large light into either the Bentwaters weapons storage area, RAF Woodbridge weapons storage?
Nothing came into Bentwaters. All right, just so you know that. Nothing came into the Bentwaters storage area.
And why I'm asking about the beam down into the Bentwaters weapons storage area with nuclear weapons, Colonel Halt said that during that night, when they were in the forest, they had a beam come down very close to them, and he said it looked like in the distance, in the direction of the Bentwaters WSA, more beams were being shot down then as well.
Not into the WSA.
Okay. Well, that's an important
I was in the tower. It didn't happen. It may have appeared so from where he was. I could see that. But nothing came in that WSA. Not unless it took all memory of it away from all of us that were in there.
I understand what you're saying.
Because it would not have been a small thing. It would have been a rather large thing to have happened. I did have some radio traffic that I could catch. I could hear him talking about things in the woods and, you know, lights in the woods and things bumping in the trees.
Do you think it was Colonel Halt's investigation?
It was somebody investigating. I couldn't tell you who was absolutely there. I believe Burroughs was out there at the time. I think they even had Geiger counters out there.
Well, it sounds that this occurred on the night that Colonel Halt and Monroe Nevels was there from Emergency Preparedness, and Lieutenant Bruce England from B Flight, and Sergeant Adrian Bustinza from D Flight. John Burroughs was there. A lot of people were there, and that sounds like this is the night that you saw this object.
Well, it probably was. And there was somebody that came up in my tower, but I don't know who he was. I don't know where he was from. I don't know what organization he was with. He came up looking through a scope. I didn't get to look at the scope. I don't know who he was or what department he was with. I could make an assumption, but it would just be an assumption.
What would your assumption be?
OSI.
Was he civilian or Air Force dress?
No, he was military. I just don't know what department he was from.
Okay. What kind of scope was he looking at the red-blue light with?
It's like a spotting scope, which would have given very good magnification.
Did he make any comments to you?
No, we didn't speak.
Wow.
Well, he didn't speak.
You tried to speak.
I'm sure I tried to speak, but he didn't. Oh, what do you do?
Well, did you try to explain to him that you had seen a light leave the big red-blue light?
Oh, I'm sure I gave him every bit of information I had. Nobody else came up the tower. I had to let him up because I had my gate closed. Nobody could come up without me allowing it.
How long did he stay there?
15, 20 minutes maybe.
He left and didn't say anything to you?
Oh, just left. On.
And no one ever debriefed you?
No one ever spoke to me. Matter of fact, nobody had ever contacted me after I got out of the service. Even the guys that seen it the same time I did. We never talked to each other.
Do you remember somebody telling you, don't talk about any of this?
No. Nobody talked to me about it. I'm telling you, nobody spoke to me about it at all.
Amazing.
Yeah. I thought it was a little odd, but, you know, when you're in the service, you just do what you're told.
The Burroughs that Sergeant Rick Bobo referred to was Airman First Class John Burroughs, who was in the Rendlesham Forest with Colonel Halt on December 28, 1980, and was also in Rendlesham Forest with another Staff Sergeant, James Penniston, 2 nights earlier after midnight on December 26th. John Burroughs was born in Bloomington, Illinois in 1960 and joined the U.S. Air Force right after high school graduation. He received orders to go to RAF Bentwaters, England, and arrived in July 1979, about 18 months before the highly strange Rendlesham Forest encounters. John remained in the Air Force until his retirement in 2006 as a tech sergeant. Right from the beginning, John Burroughs and Sergeant Jim Penniston saw what they could not explain, and something happened to their minds, either in the forest, in military interrogations later on, or both. The results have been blank or confused memories. The two men were right next to each other in the forest, but they do not remember the same details. I would now like to introduce my friend, colleague, and former RAF Bentwaters Airman First Class John Burroughs to talk about the importance of Sergeant Rick Bobo's eyewitness testimony and what he does remember. And John, I wondered if you could help the Dreamland audience understand, from your point of view, 30 years of confusion and suppression and misinformation. Why do you think that the security guard, Sergeant Rick Bobo, up in the tower above that important weapons storage area at Bentwaters, where we now know there were nuclear weapons stored and everyone was concerned about what those beams might or might not have been doing, why do you think he was never debriefed? And what is your own reaction at hearing that he was watching for 2 hours this huge red-blue light that was even sending down one or more small lights right into the forest where you guys were?
Well, first of all, I think one of the things that's interesting is he was on a totally different angle than we were on both nights. So therefore, the people that were trying to say it was the lighthouse or planets, it clearly shows it wasn't. He clearly had observation of something that was hovering over the woods, that was sending out beams of light down into the woods, that from above the ground, well, we were below the ground, so you really can't, put any credence to the lighthouse theory off of that.
Right.
Second of all, the military does it that way. If they're not sure what's going on, they'll say to other people, especially if they're not directly involved in something, the better it is, because if they start giving out information on what's going on or start talking to them about it, that gives them more information, and they have to worry about what might be said outside of where they're at.
And would you explain a little bit more, just from your experience in the Air Force for a long time, to what astonishes us in the civilian world, that somebody would come up, have the ability to enter that weapons storage area that was highly secure, go up the steps, enter, not say one word to Sergeant Bobo for at least 20 minutes, while the whole goal was to look with a spotting scope out at that huge red-blue light and leave without saying a thing, and probably was from Air Force Office of Special Investigations. How does something like that happen?
Well, obviously there was an investigation going on. People were notified, and only a select few can get into a weapons storage area. It's just not anybody who wants to get in, and they're all controlled. They have to have certain clearances and everything else. So it was clear whoever it was up there trying to get a look at it, and they were obviously going to report to people above them on what they saw and what was going on.
So listening to Sergeant Bobo, that there had to have been higher base authority who by December 28th, with Colonel Hall, the deputy base commander out there in the forest, they already knew and were investigating, even though to you all who were actually in the forest, the official kind of approach was, there's nothing to talk about and don't talk about it?
Well, yes. I mean, they definitely don't want something like that getting out. And back then it was a lot easier to control because you didn't have computers and cell phones and everything else. I mean, if something like that would have happened today, it would have been all out. It would have been all over the place really fast. It would have been almost impossible to keep it from happening, including people who could have taken pictures with their cell phones. But back then, they definitely controlled everything a lot tighter, and they definitely wanted to sit on this because, I mean, good Lord, look what was going on. And look at Colonel Halt's tape and what Bobo just described and everything else. You had all this activity going on outside the largest tech fighter wing in the Air Force, and it really does appear from all the stuff that I've looked at over the years that they really weren't sure what they were dealing with and what was going on.
and still aren't to this day, maybe. And could you now describe what you remember in your own mind, even though it's distorted and you don't remember everything? Can you talk about that moment when you have Sergeant Adrian Bustinza next to you in Rendlesham Forest, Colonel Halt and other men are far back? Describe what you remember and describe what Adrian told you.
Well, Adrian and I went forwards towards whatever was we observed hovering out over the woods in the distance from where I met with Colonel Halt. And we started running towards the object, and as we got closer to it, Adrian fell down to the ground, and I kept going. I got up close to something, or I felt like I was getting really close to something, and all I remember was as I got close to it, I seemed like I was almost on it, and then all of a sudden I realized it was gone, and I have no idea what happened. When I turned around and went back towards Adrian at the time told me that, he felt like he got knocked down, and something held him down, and he said whatever it was came over the top of me.
And the color, could you describe the color?
I tried to draw colors into what I drew at the beginning, and it was like a sunset type of color, real orangish, and there was like blue and green and stuff like that, but the predominant color was orangish, and there was some white in it. And
Adrian Bustinza, a sergeant at the base, told you that he thought that the red-orange light actually engulfed you, right? Came over you.
Well, yeah, he said whatever it was came over me, yes. I disappeared into it, I guess is the best way to put it.
And you and I have been trying to work with perhaps some hypnosis recall, and we are now at a stage in 2010 where you are perhaps reliving some of those moments. We hope to share more in the future. But I think consciously today on this Dreamland that one of the most important pieces that you could contribute is what you saw with your own eyes very consciously at the East Gate right after the 28th, that your higher command positioned you specifically at the East Gate, telling you that you had been exposed in the forest and they wanted you there. What did you see happening at the base from the East Gate?
Well, I was posted on the East Gate for 3 nights after I came back to work. Shifts. They had the gate open because they were actually doing something in the woods. They had at night they had helicopters out in the woods, and they had vehicles going out in the woods. Obviously, there were people working out in the woods. And on the second night, towards dusk, it wasn't dark yet, but it was getting dark. Something was lifted out in the woods by one of the helicopters and brought over to the Woodbridge Fight Line. It was some kind of crate or box that was carried out. I'm not sure what it was.
Do you think that it was either a craft or a piece of something that Sergeant Penniston described as a craft of unknown origin, or do you think it related to their worry about the nuclear weapons, and could any of the nuclear weapons at the Bentwaters storage have been tampered with?
Well, I mean, from where that was lifted out of, it had nothing to do with the storage area, and that was out in the woods. The storage area was farther away from where they were, but there was clearly some kind of plane came in on Sunday night after the incident, and there was activity around the storage area after that. And this is something that I can't verify, but there has been statements made that there was a movement shortly after the incident, and certain weapons were taken back to New Mexico because there were problems with them.
And finally, John, as we talk in the spring of 2010, and you are struggling to bring, were 30 men and a few women there 30 years ago. Can you describe a little bit about your efforts to see if you can bring everybody together to try to get to more truth? Because so far it's very clear that neither the UK nor the American government have told the truth or are indicating that they want to tell the truth.
Sure. I started out about a year ago with trying to get the word out to see if there would be interest in getting this all together. It's sort of coming together. There's different people I think that are interested, but it clearly would be a logistics problem, whether we did it in England or did it in the States. And some of the people would, if they did it, they wouldn't want people to know we were getting together. The second thing is I now have a Facebook site called Justice for the Men and Women of the 81st Security Police Squadron, and I'm asking everybody to join it and to take a look at what we've posted. We just recently released an individual in England who was claims to be an expert with the RA, the British military. He's retired now. Took a look at the radiation readings, and he's come up with some interesting things on that. And he also went and took a computer and broke down Colonel Halt's tape, and he's come up with some more interesting things on the transcript. But if you take a look at the site and take a look at some of the stuff that's been posted as far as Colonel Halt's tape, the transcripts, some of the different pieces that have done over the years, some of the interviews people have done, a lot of Linda's work is on it and stuff, and you'll see that there's clearly something happened to us. You can leave it open to your own interpretation on what it was, but it's clear, very clear, that something happened to us over those 3 nights, that the military did look into it, and whether they came to a conclusion or not, that's only they know, but something happened to us, and the men and women that were out there were left to wonder what happened to them, what they were exposed to. And the last bit, one of the most important things is last year, Colonel Hall, who was out there in the woods, did a press release saying that he felt what happened to us was E.T. in nature. So it's clearly something that, has grown over the years, and it's clearly that something has happened to us, and it's time for the government to step forward and help the men and women that were out there and let them know what happened to them, and even go a step further and give disclosure on what they know over the last 40 or 50 years on what's really going on, period.
And Whitley, in addition to that very important June 25th, 2009 press release that I reported on Dreamland and Coast and Earth Files about a year ago, in which the Deputy Base Commander, Colonel Halt, who was out in the forest when Rick Bobo was up in the tower and John Burroughs was with him in the forest along with a lot of other people, the fact that Colonel Halt went on the record and said that the lights and beams that he encountered on December 28, 1980 in Rendlesham Forest were, this is a quote, extraterrestrial in origin, close quote, was the first admission by anyone in authority from RAF Bantwaters Woodbridge in 30 years. Further, Britain's Lord Hill Norton was a 5-star admiral, chief of the UK Defence Staff, chairman of NATO Military Command, and said about the RAF Bantwaters phenomena, quote, it had to be of defense significance, close quote. And former UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher told journalist Georgina Bruni, quote, yes, Bantwaters happened, but we can't tell the people, close quote, that became the title of Georgina's book published in November 2000. What do you and all of us should we think about Margaret Thatcher and the various need-to-know agencies in the United Kingdom and the United States, knowing that something happened that the people cannot be told? What did happen in the Rendlesham Forest that the rest of the world cannot know? That, Whitley, is why I keep doing this research.
Well, Linda, you have, speaking of that, done a magnificent job with this. We've come a long way from stories about car lights and lights from lighthouses, exactly. And now we know that this is true, and the question, of course, remains, why do they hide this when it's obviously at this point just a kind of a pro forma exercise? I don't like it any more than anyone else does, but what worries me is that there may be some more powerful force compelling governments, to the U.S. and U.K. governments, to act as they do. I just don't know.
Well, that is a good point. And if there is a much bigger box that has been influencing the U.K. and the U.S. military for much longer than 30 years, with information that those two governments and perhaps all of our allies from World War II have been exposed to information that, just like Margaret Thatcher said, they don't think that the people can be told. I argue that as we move into the 21st century, not only should we be told, the entire planet deserves the truth that their governments are withholding.
Well, of course we do, and I can tell you from personal experience, and I know you've had similar experiences, the ones who can't handle it are not the people. It's the insiders who have trouble with this, believe you me.
Yeah, I think that is a very good point, too, that perhaps a lot of the cover-up from higher military, as Colonel Halt told John Burroughs and me, he was more worried about his career and his job than anything else that night in December 28th. He said, quote unquote, "This is a career killer." And what he meant was, if you tangle with the UFO phenomena, it's going to bruise you for the rest of your life. Why should we be living on a planet where the truth about other intelligences in this universe should force everybody in authority to lie?
Well, I don't know the answer. I just hope this isn't some sort of a prison planet. That's all I can say, Linda. Linda Moulton Howe, thank you so much. It has been a really remarkable report, and I believe you're going to expand on this quite considerably at the Dreamland Festival. Isn't that correct?
I'm going to be sharing a whole lot more beyond Rick Bobo's testimony, John Burroughs, absolutely such important work that John is doing. And I have now a whole series of firsthand testimonies from people that you have never heard from before that I will be sharing at the Nashville Festival.
Well, you know, someone who won't ever get a Pulitzer Prize for her work as a journalist in this area is Linda Moulton Howe, and if ever anyone deserved one, it's you. See you at the Dreamland Festival, Linda. Thank you for a terrific report.
Thank you.
Well, today I am very happy to have back on Dreamland David Sereda. David has not been on Dreamland since 2007 when we talked about the Roswell incident. It was one of the most amazing interviews I can ever remember because he talked about how children all over the country started making little model UFOs, model flying saucers, right after that incident occurred, and the strangeness of the synchronicity of this event. It was a very interesting interview, and if you're a subscriber, go to the unknowncountry.com subscriber section and go to the Dreamland archive and scroll down, and you'll see this show, 11/17/07. David also has been recently on Revelations talking about his new DVD, Quantum Communication. And a lot has happened since then in David's life. David, I think, could best be described as a scientist and a searcher. He's been a meditator for 30 years. He has been involved in many close encounter type experiences, and it's just a very all-around interesting adventurer kind of at the edge of reality. David, welcome to the program.
Whitley, it's an honor to be on your show today.
Well, thank you very much. I have wanted to have you back for quite some time, and why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been happening? Let's talk, for example, right now, as we are talking, a significant solar flare, solar quantum mass ejection and geomagnetic storm is just concluding. What does this mean? What are you finding about this, the relationship between the Earth and the Sun?
Well, firstly, just from a purely physical, non-spiritual look at the sun, I mean, I kind of watch the sun like, investors watch the stock market. And thank God I'm not in the stock market, and I'm in the kind of experiential mode of watching our sun and watching the effects. And to understand what the sun does to the Earth, it's really kind of simple physics. Einstein won the Nobel Prize for explaining the photoelectric effect, which is the transference of photo or solar energy, light, electromagnetic energy, which spans both the visible and the invisible ultraviolet and X-rays and gamma rays. And the transference of that energy as pure non-physical energy, and when it hits mass, for example, a conductor like steel or copper or even aluminum, it causes electrons or energy to flow in the medium. And basically that energy now becomes physical, because when you think of electrons flowing through a copper wire, that's like little bowling balls flowing around, in a bowling alley, and they hit the bowling pins and they knock the pins over. So it's kind of light transferring into physical motion. And once you understand that, the sun was previously thought to be a constant, or what NASA called a solar energy constant. They didn't really understand that it was pulsing and fluctuating on a regular basis. But when NASA put these cameras looking at the sun in both the visible and the invisible ultraviolet spectra, if you search on Google the NASA SOHO-LASCO cameras, you can see we take pictures about every 15 or 20 minutes right now with these cameras, and we can look at different color photographs of the sun and see what is actually happening. And we actually went through the longest solar minimum in recorded history, where there were virtually no sunspots at all. I mean, the sun was blank, a smooth kind of pearl with the odd little blip once in a while for almost a full year. And NASA, in recorded history, and David Hathaway at the NASA Solar Observatory, whom I was in dialogues with, they'd never really seen anything like this, and that's why we had such a cold winter and such a, seeing snow in Texas and, the Great South. People thought, oh my God, it's the end of global warming. There really is no global warming. And that is not true at all. That's what was happening. And there I was, last winter in Sedona, about 6,000 feet, and I stick this freezing cold crystal, this big quartz crystal, and I'm sitting in my hot tub, and I sit it in the hot tub, just to play around with it, and it cracks. And the reason it cracks is because when you take something cold and you expose it to sudden high temperature, the differential between the two produces a shock wave that produces a cracking, a very, very violent action. Whereas if I put a nice warm rock in my hot tub, it wouldn't crack. So the Earth got very, very cold, and then suddenly I noticed the first sunspot emerging. And the sun spins around counterclockwise every 27 days. So it's what you're seeing when you look at these cameras on the SOHO-LASCO are magnetic spots, black hole spots, and actual sunspots that rotate around and are morphing, changing constantly. And when they come into near or direct alignment to Earth facing, depending on their strength and what they do, they are very dangerous. And on the 28th of September 2009, I saw the first one coming into position. And this is when I just started, Whitley, when I just started my, theory of watching the sun. And all of a sudden, and I'm looking at the photo now in my ebook, and you can see what happened on that day. We had a huge earthquake, off the coast of Australia in the American Samoa region, and we had tsunamis that killed hundreds of people and wiped out whole towns and villages. And, that I thought, wow, no, that's amazing. Could that be coincidence? And I just kept watching. There were, again, no sunspots for a long time. Very little activity on the sun. And the next really big one is not very far off from that, is January the 12th, 2010. It's actually very, very large. It's a magnetic spot. Now, magnetic spots seem to be as powerful or more deadliness possibly than even sunspots. Sometimes on the NASA cameras you'll see the magnetic spot activity and no sunspot. That doesn't mean because there's no sunspot that nothing's going to happen. And on that day, everybody knows what happened. We had the Haiti earthquake. And it's, I thought, this cannot possibly be a coincidence. So there I was, February 23rd at the International UFO Congress. I was about to lecture on the 24th of February at Bob Brown's conference. And actually, it was days before that I was showing Bob Brown, and I was looking at him, and I said, Bob, there's a really big magnetic spot, but it has this long filament. It's actually a 1 million kilometer long filament. It's like a big twisted magnetic snake dangling out of the sun. And I researched that when these things break and they collapse, they splash into the sun like throwing a pebble into a pond, and they're called hydroflares. And because we only take pictures every 15 or 20 minutes with the SOHO cameras, you can actually miss the actual hydroflare itself. But suddenly I saw it it actually broke on February 24th, 2010. It broke and it collapsed into the sun. And I predicted to Bob Brown, I said, just wait in 2 or 3 days, because it takes, when you get activity on the sun, it takes 8.3 minutes for electromagnetic energy to reach Earth. But it takes about 2 or 3 days or even 4 days for the plasma wave of charged hot particles to hit Earth, which is what you were just talking about. We're experiencing the tail end of that right now. And what happened 3 days later was the Chile 8.8 earthquake. And just before that, we had a 7.0 in Japan. So, I mean, it was consistent. No matter how many times I actually looked at what was happening on the sun, I knew that something big was going to happen on the Earth. So the next thing I did is I decided, let's go backwards in time and see Hurricane Floyd, for example. From September 5th to the 14th, 1999, Floyd was forming. And sure enough, if I look at the sun on September 14th, the day 1999 that Hurricane Floyd struck, you can see that 7 days prior to that, a massive sunspot actually was directly facing Earth. And the day Floyd struck, another set of magnetic spots, 3 of them were direct Earth facing. And then, even worse, the giant tsunami of December 26, 2004, which produced a 9.3 earthquake, in the universal time code on the NASA SOHO cameras on the sun, I can see a massive coronal mass ejecta coming out of the sun about 15 minutes before that earthquake struck. And that means that the electromagnetic part of that coronal mass ejecta transferred its energy in 8.3 minutes, and about 15 minutes after the eruption, we get a 9.3 earthquake and a tsunami ensues.
Wow,
So,
but wait a minute here, because the material part of the coronal mass ejection didn't reach Earth for hours, 24 to 48 hours after that, because it's much slower.
The physical part takes 2 or 3 or 4 days. It actually depends on how charged the particles are. So it can either be theoretically the electromagnetic part if it's strong enough, or the plasma wave, or both. I've actually noticed sometimes as soon as the CME erupts, 8.38 minutes later, and then following, because that electromagnetic energy hits the Earth, and through the photoelectric effect, it starts heating up magma, it changes weather patterns, and anything can happen down here. So they're both very, very dangerous. And so then, there's no doubt that there was a connection to that giant tsunami and the sun. And then going back to Hurricane Katrina, as it was forming, the day it was forming, August 23rd, 2005, we have direct magnetic spot alignment to Earth. So when you really look at over and over and over again, what I started to do next is on Facebook, on my page on Facebook, I started just posting, here's what's happening on the sun today. Watch for the effects either today or in the ensuing days. And sure enough, as a prediction, instead of going after the fact and saying, see, I told you so, I started making predictions. And every single time, something, not necessarily where there's human civilization, but we would get earthquakes above what I call background noise earthquakes. Now, background noise earthquakes are the constant stream of, 1.5, 2.5, all the way up to about the 5 level. When you get above 5 and you start to get into 6s and 7s, that is not normal. That is not normal background noise. And when the sun spots and magnetic spots and black spots would go away for a period of days, you can see all of the earthquakes subsiding and going back down again. Now let's come to what just happened, because what just happened in this past week is enormous. What just happened in the past week was 2 volcanoes went off in Central America, one in Guatemala, one in Ecuador, and then just a few days after that, this is only, it might have been just yesterday or the day before, a massive eruption happen in a volcano under the ocean in the Pacific, and spewed ash into the sky 40,000 feet. I don't know if you heard about that one yet.
No, I did not hear about that one. I've heard about all of the others. I was just going to ask you, what about this week? Because it's been really wild out there.
Yeah, it's in fact, it's so wild. In fact, you see this giant sinkhole appearing in the center of Guatemala City.
Guatemala City, my God. The pictures of that, and folks, you can find this all over the internet. The New York Times has got a wonderful article about it with great pictures, including If You Can Stand It, and he's not kidding. Look at the high def image of it. This thing is terrifying. It's an entire the middle of a four-way stop, a block. The entire thing is just gone. And the sinkhole seems to just drop off into blackness.
Yeah, this is where I hate to say this, to listeners, because I'm not a person who wants to see disasters happen before we get to the next part, which is how consciousness is affecting all this. But think of 4 movers who are trying to move a large table. And you only have one mover on one corner of the table. It's producing a regular amount of pressure, but you can't lift the whole table. When you look at the Ring of Fire, which is where all the tectonic plate action occurs on a fairly inconsistent but regular basis, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I was following early, U.S. Geological Survey data on earthquakes, most of the activity occurs between Japan, the Aleutian Islands, and Alaska. So it's like you have one part of the entire Ring of Fire, which extends all the way through California, the Great San Andreas Fault, all the way through Baja, all the way through Central and South America, and all the way back up around, through, Australia and Asia and Japan, and all the way back up to Alaska. So that's the ring. Now, imagine that is a table that you're trying to lift the whole thing, but you only got one mover on one end of the table. Well, what happened is after the Asian tsunami, the 9.3 earthquake that happened there, that area has continuously been active and shaking. In fact, we've even seen some 8s and above 8s in that region since December 26, 2004. Then when, jumping way ahead on the timeline, when Haiti happened, that region continuously is shaking all the time. And then when Baja happened, that area is continuously shaking all the time, as well as, Chile, which is before Haiti, and that area has been shaking quite violently all the time. So now you have this constant amount of pressure, as if you have 4 physical movers trying to lift a table on all 4 corners, or 5 or 6 corners. The other place we have constant activity is off the coast of Australia, near American Samoa and the Philippines and all those areas. So what's starting to happen is the sun is transferring so much energy to our planet that it's constantly active in all these places, which is unprecedented. I have never seen the levels of activity on all of the different corners of the plate all at the same time. And now you're seeing sinkholes appear in Canada and Guatemala, and so what's happening? Well,
we're going to take a little break, and afterwards we're going to find out what's happening. We're back with David Sereda. This is really fascinating, David. David, where can we meet you on the Internet? Give us the best place.
My 2 physical websites are voiceentertainment.net and lightstreamtechnologies.com. That's lightstreamtechnologies.com. And on Facebook, you just search my name and, ask to become friends. I usually say yes to everybody. So
yeah, I think you and I are friends, in fact, on Facebook.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, I see your picture there.
Yeah, my Facebook page is wild. It filled up, actually, but it's a fun place, and I'm sure yours is, too. I haven't looked at it yet. So you can meet him on Facebook. Do you Twitter?
No, I haven't figured out Twitter, and it's kind of hard because I don't really go to these places that often online, but I do hang out there once in a while. And,
yeah. Well, unlike me, I'm everywhere. I'm all over my message boards. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I love the stuff.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great place to hang out.
Right, and especially my own message boards, which is where I hang out the most. In any case, let's get back to this. Now, I have a question for you. In the past, has this always been true during periods of solar intensity, or is it more true now? Do you know if there's been any intensification of the sensitivity of Earth to the sun or not?
Well, this is where it gets really amazing. I actually, have two models in an ebook called Quantum Electrodynamics in 2012, where I superimpose subatomic particle orbits on top of the solar system and on top of a galaxy. And I compare what happens in the quantum universe versus what happens in the astrophysical larger scale models. And firstly, this is not really well known. As we're approaching 2012, this is really shocking, but at the University of Kansas, a Russian researcher and an American astrophysicist have studied the fossil records for mass extinctions, and they've compared that to where we actually are and where we're migrating towards in our galaxy. And inside of our spiral Milky Way galaxy, we're traveling around the galaxy, and we are about a third of the way from the outer rim, spiraling inwards into a higher and higher frequency orbit. But we're also bobbing along in a spiraling wave that dips above north of the galactic plane and south of the galactic plane. The dinosaurs went extinct 64 million years ago, and it's interesting because this wave cycle from top to bottom to top is a 64 million year wave cycle. And we are right now 10 parsecs, which is 180 trillion miles north of the true galactic plane. But we're just coming out of the thickness of the line that represents the galactic plane. And this is what these physicists found out, is most mass extinctions happen as you're migrating higher and higher above true north. And when you get out of the dust plane, which we're about to do, the temperatures and the energy transmission from the supergalactic center are way more powerful than they are when we're south of the galactic center. It appears that human beings, let's say that, Lucy, the oldest, skeleton ever discovered in Africa, is about, 3.5 million years old. We are about 2 million years true north of the galactic plane. So the oldest humans probably evolved when we were just south of the actual galactic plane itself, the true galactic plane, which means we were still inside the thickness of the line because it's a very thick, dusty, cosmic plane full of stars and planets and all kinds of debris and comets and all these things. So with all of that in the way, all that debris in the way between the super suns in the center of the galaxy, we are kind of buffered by its intense energy. But as we rise above the galactic plane, the transfer of energy gets so powerful that, firstly, a lot of organisms on our planet suddenly die off because they can't handle the intensity of the radiation coming from galactic center. Now, galactic center is more powerful than our sun, so it transfers its electromagnetic energy to our sun, which then conversely transfers it to Earth. And then Earth, which is full of tectonic plate activity, volcanoes, and weather patterns, suddenly responds to that influx of energy. And so that's what we're seeing. So
we are seeing an increase then. Definitely.
When we come out of the edge, and I predict that's probably what the 2012, which is really getting into the beginning of 2013, really is. This point that we're at now, which is 10 parsecs or 180 trillion miles north of the true galactic plane, like a razor blade true, we are exactly where the dinosaurs went extinct. And this is a transformation point, not necessarily our death and the end of the world, but a massive transformation point.
What's so weird about this to me is about a year ago, I noticed that Revelation 20:12, chapter 20, verse 12, is the moment of the opening of the book of life and the last judgment. And I thought, what a bizarre coincidence. And it inspired me to write a novel called The Omega Point, which is about, really asks the question, under such circumstances, in a time like this, is there a plan for mankind? Is there something that will happen that there will be some kind of rescue of our meaning and our being? And now it turns out that in the book, essentially what you just described happening happens. But I knew nothing about this. It's the scientific side of it that you've just described. I never found this information, and yet it's in the book. It's there. It's all there.
Wow.
Yeah. So, well, listen, we're going to take another little break here. When we get back, we're going to start to talk about that very issue. Is there a plan for us? What does human consciousness have to do with all of this? We'll be right back. We're back with David Sereda. David, I want you to tell us again, what are the best places to go to get to you on the Internet?
My websites are voiceentertainment.net, lightstreamtechnologies.com, and also on Facebook. You can just search my name, David Sereda, and ask to be my friend, and if you're not Satan, I'll say yes.
Okay, yeah, Satan applied for friendship with me about 50 times. Okay, so now let's go on. Here we are in this really remarkable situation. We're coming into a change, and we can see it all around us. It's real. In the way the Earth is affected by the energies of the universe and of the sun. This is going to cause upheavals on Earth. A lot of people are going to be affected by it. We're being affected by it right now, all of us in different ways. What does this mean, David?
Well, first of all, I mean, here's another amazing phenomena. When we look at the movie Knowing with Nicolas Cage, there's this great video on YouTube where this movie was made, of course, before the big Gulf oil.
Tell us how to find the video. I've seen it, folks, and it's just remarkable. Go ahead. Tell us how.
Well, yeah, you just search the movie Knowing and Gulf oil disaster on YouTube, and you'll find this video. And you see, Nicolas Cage sitting in front of the TV, and you see, their talk about solar flares and the sun. And then all of a sudden there is a oil rig that explodes in the Gulf of Mexico, and it's a huge disaster. And he's looking at it, and you go, oh, my God, this movie was made, it was released a year before this happened, and it was written probably several years ago. I mean, was this movie a premonition to exactly what was going to happen to us? Well, I decided to search the sun the day of the explosion itself on the rig. And sure enough, several hours in Universal Time Code on the NASA Soho Alaska, there was a large coronal mass ejecta that happened on the sun, and not necessarily very much of it was 100% Earth-facing. It was probably 10% Earth-facing. And I thought, was that energetic dynamic co-responsible for human error? Did it affect consciousness? Or possibly, is what's happening in the Gulf also tectonic? Is it a volcano? And when I started researching on the National Geographic websites, and I looked at the oil rigs off the coast of California, and sure enough, where you get oil off of the coastline, there was geothermal and also lava flow and volcanic activity under the ocean. It turns out that where we drill for oil, it's like drilling on the back of a blood boiling pig. You're basically drilling into geothermal activity areas where we shouldn't be drilling, because those areas are very, very vulnerable. And if you give them an outlet by puncturing a hole in them, if they heat up, they are going to spew out tremendous pressure, and you're going to get an explosion. So I've been kind of looking all over the world for the transference of this electromagnetic energy and what the effects are. And, off the coast of Australia, where there's been a constant amount of earthquake activity, the ocean sea level floors have risen several hundred feet in the last less than the last year. And then on Fox News in the Mediterranean, they're saying there's a volcano underneath the ocean there that they, literally volcanologists think could erupt any day now, any time now, and produce a tsunami that would bury southern Italy. Then you have this eruption that just happened yesterday or the day before in the Pacific, where 40,000 foot plume of ash in the middle of nowhere in the ocean, and you have the volcanoes in Iceland. And it's like the whole freaking world is heating up, and it's pretty obvious what's starting to happen. But what's amazing about the movie Knowing is it really starts to move in the direction that we're actually heading in, but it may not. Hopefully, it won't be quite that disastrous in this transfer of this movement through the galaxy as we're going higher north. But more interestingly than the Earth changes, this is my favorite part, is, there have been scientific studies on DNA in different living systems such as fish and even single-cell organisms, and how they respond to solar events. And firstly, this is in the movie Water, which is on my website. A Russian scientist named Alexander Zhijevsky discovers under the microscope that little amoebas start to go crazy at the instantaneous moment that a solar flare, a coronal mass ejection, has left the sun. But its electromagnetic energy doesn't arrive until 8.3 minutes later, but they know instantaneously that it's happening, and they start protecting themselves by increasing the energy of their membrane to protect themselves from the oncoming radiation. And that is right there is key to what the biologists at Kansas State University realized, what living systems would survive this new level of radiation would be those systems that biologically create and adjust the energy of their membrane. Now, we are like, think of a single cell under the microscope. The membrane is just the perimeter or the kind of tissue around the cell that protects the cell and decides to allow information to come in or information to not get into the cell. And the cell is very, very conscious. I mean, when you get into Bruce Lipton, discussions, you realize how intelligent a single cell is and its ability to actually not just receive, nutrition or let in a virus or not let in a virus, but actual consciousness and information. So what actually happens to DNA in studies that have been done when you expose it to very weak changes in magnetism and electromagnetism? There's a study in the movie Water, and this is actually my favorite scene in the whole movie, is these fish are artificially induced with electromagnetic fields, and their offspring are suddenly born with these beautiful phenotype, which means visible changes. They all suddenly have stripes on their bellies, rainbow stripes appear in all of them, and they all seem to function in this perfect collective mind. Whatever one fish does, the other one copies it. And I went, wow, if that can happen in one generation, what's going to happen to the children on Earth who are born in the presence of the new sun, which we're now coming into? Will they be born, like the X-Men, with superpowers? Will the powers that, the psychic powers that some human beings seem to possess, or some of them gain through meditation, will this become very, very common? And I think that's a subject that you've covered, and you've followed a lot of different, children, or, whatever you want to call them, indigo children or star children, who have these abilities to see invisible beings, which is something that I can do, and actually, have dialogues with beings from other dimensions and other parts of our universe that seem to be completely invisible to us. And that is what I'm most excited about in the new sun and coming into 2012 is there's no question that if even a weak amount of electromagnetism can cause phenotype changes, real level changes, what deeper level changes will happen with this new impetus of energy coming from the galactic center to our sun, and then eventually, the sun transfers it to Earth. Now that's just the tip of the iceberg of what happens, in this transference of electromagnetism and how it affects a living organism. But there's a far deeper level of what's going on, and that is when you look at the extraterrestrial impetus that's happening, and you look at the idea of exploring the invisible through photography, looking into the ultraviolet, we can see on NASA SOHO cameras, the green camera, which is looking into the far ultraviolet and the extreme ultraviolet, we can actually see amazing, very, very large spacecraft appearing around the sphere of the sun, especially these architectures, these amazing architectures, are very, very visible prior and during to when the sun is about to produce these huge bursts of energy.
Wow. David, we're going to take a little break. We'll be right back with David Sereda. We're talking to David Sereda. David, what is the latest thing? It's like that you've got. You've got so much out there. I remember. Is it the Quantum Communications DVD?
Quantum Communication is the newest film. The Voice, which is really part one if you haven't seen The Voice. We also have Mona Lisa's Little Secret, which is kind of, an abstraction to the work of consciousness and science. It's really, really an amazing film. And then I have these electronic books, which Quantum Electrodynamics in 2012 is very, very specific to what we're talking about now. It actually, it's a very, very visual presentation. It's an electronic book. It's not meant to be printed. It's meant to be just looked as a PDF on your computer screen. So those are the things that are out right now. And also I have my meditations and I have my pendants, my energy pendants.
And you can visit David Sereda's store by clicking through to it on the Dreamland description page on unknowncountry.com. So, and there's a lot in there, actually. I think that the meditation instructions are really very interesting. I've listened to some of them. And as you know, I'm also a long-time meditator, and they're very well worth your time. In fact, it all is. His DVDs are wonderful and produced at a very high level of finish. They're very professional DVDs. It's not those awful things that we've all been so disappointed by with beautiful covers and horrible DVDs inside. Okay, David, now we are on a journey. It is a journey into a very, very complicated and difficult unknown. I asked you before, is there a plan for us? And you seem to be saying that yes, in a sense there was. Now I'm going to, and you described it actually very beautifully. Now I'm going to ask you another question, and this gets back, way back, to your early Marian and Christ visions and experiences. You mentioned invisible beings. These are some of the invisible beings that you have seen and come into contact with. Mm-hmm. Who are we, David?
Yeah, I mean, this is the question that I wake up with every day. You know, I lately I've been doing 1 hour sitting meditations very late at night because I find that if I meditate really late at night before I go to sleep, the chances of making contact, true contact, are much higher than if I meditate in the morning. And I keep asking that question because, I had 3 apparitions of Christ blazing like thousands of suns, and I was practicing Buddhism and Vipassana meditation most of my life, and for the past year I've been doing one 45-minute breathing session, deep breathing session per week. So I'm on 43 weeks right now, and I'm really doing all I can to have my direct contact experiences. And when I met Christ the first time in 1994, when I almost died in my tent in Topanga in the pouring rain, I got so many answers to so many questions. It felt like there was no separation between, being human, being us, and what was about to happen next. I have, on that day in October of 1994, when that experience occurred, within days I was seeing the dead. I was seeing ghosts. I mean, I've literally seen hundreds and hundreds up to this point in my life. I've seen angels with my physical eyes open. I don't get a mental picture. I don't get an intuitive psychic sense and then create an imagery in my third eye. I see these beings as three-dimensionally as I see a real physical human. And
exactly what do you do to get these visions, to see them this way? Because you're talking to a lot of very advanced meditators, Dreamland listeners. Go ahead.
Right. I didn't plan on it. In the Buddhist sense, Buddhism split. There's a deep schism in Buddhism in the four major schools, from the Mahayanist to the Theravada Buddhists, who the Theravada Buddhists are very core to the experience of transformation, the 7 different levels of samadhi, the 7th being where nirvana begins, and they don't give much importance to other realms and visions and these type of things. But the Theravada Buddhists, are very different from the Mahayana Buddhists. The Tibetans are Mahayana-based Buddhism. They give a lot of importance to the other worlds and the other universes and the other paradise realms and different dimensions that become manifest and visible to the meditator. Those, that's kind of what happened to me. I didn't have any plan that I wanted to see visions. I never even asked to see Jesus Christ. I was simply hardcore Buddhist. And I had studied with a lot of the gurus from India. I mean,
how did you know it was Jesus?
Oh, there was no question. When I left my body in the pouring rain in my tent, which was flooded with water, I came above the oak trees, which were in the dark before sunrise, and there was a giant granite crucifix that had this angelic kind of sound like the monolith in the movie 2001 and 10. And there was a baptismal pool below shaped like a cross, and the water was so beautiful. It was calling my astral body to fall into this water. And so when I fell into it, I was purified by what Christians call the Holy Spirit. And then I was carried like a mother carries her baby above the rain clouds, above Topanga, which is my dad's ranch, which is where I was living when I went broke. At the time, is right next to the inn of the 7th Ray. If anybody knows Topanga, literally, I could hear all the weddings there, living in my tent during those years. And I was above the rain clouds, and I thought, oh my God, you're dead, David. You froze to death, and you're up in the clouds now. Oh my God, this is like, where are you going? And these little atoms, trillions of little atoms of light, below, above, behind, in front of me, they all rushed together from the far reaches of space, and just this swooshing sound that was deafening materialized the body of Christ. So first, I saw the sign of the cross. Then I was baptized, which I was already baptized as a baby Catholic, but we never practiced Catholicism in our family because my dad was a psychologist from Berkeley and traveled to India and was influenced by the Far Eastern ideas. So we were not exposed to Catholicism. So I had no idea that I was expecting that, my mentor and who was going to be my master when I died was going to be Christ. And when I saw him, it was devastating to see that the entirety of the power of the cosmos was all inside of one point. I could see the aura that extended beyond Christ's body, blazing brighter than 1,000 suns. I could not look for 1 second. I fell upon my face and hid my face, and I would look up again. Oh my God, he's too holy, it's too powerful. The whole universe is coming from this one person. How could that be? How could, all the gurus that I've met and the Dalai Lama in India, none of them compared to the magnitude of the power of this single body of light, this person that is so, it was unbelievable who he was. And he floated up next to me, and I kept my face down on the ground. And if you look at him, it's just, you overdose on unimaginable levels of ecstasy. It's so beautiful and so cosmically expansive to the mind that in 1 second looking at him, suddenly your mind is expanding out into the universe at such tremendous speed that you have no point to grasp onto the shape of the human body, your toe, your foot, the idea of being just a point is no longer there. And so when you lower the gaze, it reduces the effect. And his feet, oh my God, looking at Jesus' feet is just mind-boggling. There's just no way to describe what happens to consciousness just looking at the feet. It
Why
leads
is
like
that?
A bear.
Why the feet?
What's that?
Why the feet?
Well, remember, in India, the feet are transmission points for the master. You look at the seraphim, the highest level angels in the ninth sphere of consciousness. Their wings cover their feet and their eyes. So because their feet are so powerful that even if a person wasn't ready and they looked at the feet, it would blow your circuit. It's just too much energy. So the first thing Jesus says to me is, I have appeared to a number of people throughout the universe, but at different levels of their spiritual ability. No one in all creation has seen me in my entirety. Even now, which is what I was seeing, was at least as bright as 1,000 of our suns. He says, you are not seeing me in my entirety. It's not possible at this time. And then he began the long teachings that he gave me, which were more consistent with the Gnostic Gospels, which I later discovered, than with the canonized
Well, the canonical Gospels, the Gnostic Gospels, are actually mostly earlier than the canonical Gospels, and probably a little bit closer. They're mostly teachings. They're not stories of his life. They're
right.
Raw teachings from when he actually was here.
Exactly. I think they are absolutely true. There's no doubt, and I've read all of them. And, so that began that day. All of a sudden, I could see the dead. I saw Princess Diana as clear as day 3 times the same morning while the sun was up in my, I had moved from my tent, which is actually my tree planting tent that I used tree planting in Canada for, over 15 years, just that single tent. I built a big 12 by 24 foot deck on my dad's ranch, and I put a yurt on it. It's a really high quality canvas building, basically, and I put a bed and a TV and a desk and meditation pad and my computer, and I lived in there for years and worked and had so many experiences there. And that's kind of where my fascination with, once I had the experience of seeing so many invisible beings, I became obsessed, having been a professional photographer for 20 years, with invisible photography. And then I got into the NASA tapes and looking at the cameras that were looking into the ultraviolet. And then, everywhere I could see a possibility to see the invisible universe, I became obsessed with. And then when I found the sun, that you could look at the sun and the invisible, and I started seeing and many people have seen these, the giant UFOs that have been appearing around the sun.
Yes, I was going to ask you about those, but go ahead. That's great that you brought it up.
Well, going way back, you go to the time of Pythagoras, who, in the 5th century BC, 6th century BC in Greece, he hears the music of the planets, and he's known for the giving birth to modern and classical music, and he is the father of trigonometry, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, finding the angle of the triangle. He's more than a mathematician, he's more than even a mystic. But Pythagoras travels to the sun and describes that beings actually live there, actual what we would call demigods or superluminal beings live there that are not visible to our dimension, but they're really there. And consistent with his experience, Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet, travels to the sun, and he sees many of the great enlightened masters there, in his tradition, living in the sun. And now, in this day and age, this just happened to me just over a month ago. The one area that I had not studied is the Greek classics and the Greek gods. I was very, very, very ignorant. And I have this incredible dream that I'm behind a man with a long flowing white beard on the right with a white robe, and then next to him on the left is a woman with long flowing brown hair and a white robe. And this planet is spinning turbulently, and we fly off the planet as 2 eagle wings manifest in each of their left hand, his right hand and her left hand. And I fly off the planet, and we land at this place where there is a stone, what I now know is called the Omphalos at Delphi. and they're standing in front of it, and the woman tells me, the man says that he doesn't believe the humans will ever awaken to real magic that's really here. And she says, no, I believe they will. And then I hear Prometheus 3 times. And I've never heard the name Prometheus before. I don't even know that that's really a person. And I wake up and I tell my wife, I've got to go to the computer. I've got to bookmark this name if it even exists. And it turns out there is a Prometheus, and he is the father, in the Greek classics, the creator of humanity, who fashioned us from clay, very similar to the God of the Old Testament, Jehovah, and breathed life into us. And that Zeus and his triumphant gods and goddesses, they literally have, this is very powerful, they have destroyed, through the power of nature, the human race 5 times and remade us, because each time we seem to fail, they recreate us and refashion our DNA to create a new human. And this is very consistent with Zecharia Sitchin's work in the Babylonian mythologies and the ancient Sumerian mythologies, that the gods didn't like how we were evolving, and they would destroy us and remake us and create a new human race. Well, the dream comes at a time in our history where we are truly failing. We are truly failing to take care of our planet, to take care of each other. We're destroying the environment.
We are failing big time. I mean, you just have to fly across the Gulf of Mexico to see that at this point.
Yeah, this disaster is unimaginable. What will come of it if we, and where it's all heading is simply unimaginable to the whole American continent. The ratio of gas to oil is 1,000 to 1. I mean, it's frying people's brain cells right now, and they don't even know it. But anyway, what's happening here is this dream comes, and I'm now just deeply immersed in Greek classics, because I believe the experience happens to prompt me to study deep into the Greeks. And you find, once again, the Greeks have this mythology of gods whose relationship to our sun is so clearly evident that, for example, Hermes in Hermes Trismegistus, which I just read, it shows the relationship between the human body and mind and the astral body, which is limited to travel between the earth and the moon, and what the yogis call the causal body or light body has the ability to travel to the sun and the stars and beyond.
Yes, very important material here, folks, because if you're on a journey, your journey is about your light body. Go ahead.
So the sun in all of these mythologies are full of cosmic beings and spaceships, and it's all really there. So when you see cameras that are looking into the invisible, they're confirming. I mean, I have got a clear photograph, which I'll send you to post on your site, of this amazing, what people thought was a UFO that astronomers saw above our atmosphere. It looked like a streaking comet, but it looked like it had 2 rings, like 2 wedding bands crossing each other at almost 90 degrees. And
yes, it was a remarkable picture. I remember it very well.
Okay, so you know the photograph, and that was February 2nd, I believe, 2010. Well, I found that exact same object right next to the sun. 1 or 2, the days on the actual day of the photography on the sun was the same day or the day before the appearance that everybody saw on the news. But it's the same object with the double rings. And so they don't know why it's streaking. They thought it was an explosion between, 2, cometary bodies. But an explosion wouldn't look like that. You wouldn't see these 2 beautiful rings. The streaking, I believe, is caused by as it left the sun, it carried a lot of the charged particles and plasma in the sun belt, in the solar belt, and that was what was streaming. Scientists couldn't figure out why it was streaming because it's not inside the atmosphere, and you don't get a streaking comet unless it's burning inside of the atmosphere. And so what I believe now is with this invisible photography of the sun, you can see this double ring. It's actually much clearer than the other image, and then it becomes very, very physically manifest. And shows up, to astronomers, and nobody knows what it is. These, to me, are the giant spherical super ships of the gods and goddesses who are constantly in this relationship in the invisible universe between here and our sun. So that means all that you see happening on the sun, and all of the explosions that are happening on the sun, and the timing of when they align to Earth and the effects they produce, there's a whole other element to this, and that is the consciousness of how consciousness tells matter what to do. And so it's no accident what is happening. They are clearly seeing that we have failed. We have failed as custodians, and I really don't believe we're going to get away with, the oil civilization much longer. We are going to have to transform and change.
Well, David, we are going to have to transform and change, too, because we have reached the end of our time together on Dreamland. Folks, I want you to listen very carefully to what David said after I asked him about his experience, visionary experience of Christ. The reason is that sequence in this very important interview began with asking him who we are. This is the best description of where we are going and who we are that I have ever heard. So keep it in your heart. It is your future, and as we go into this very difficult time bearing the cross of life, we will find, those of us who are doing this and really working at it, that there is another level that will open up to us just when the darkness seems the deepest. Thank you so much for being with us,